This Lunch and Learn is the first of a series that Greater Manchester Moving are hoping to run throughout the year, sort of showcasing and sharing some learning and insights of some of the place-based working going on across Greater Manchester. That's going on across Greater Manchester. As I mentioned, my name is Steph. I'm part of the Place Partnership team working at GM Moving. For those of you that are unfamiliar, GM Moving is a charity that works across all 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester with our overall vision of enabling active lives for all. So just so we all start off on the same page, a lot of you may have already heard this before, but for those that you are unfamiliar with Place Partnerships, Place Partnerships is Sport England's response to place-based inequalities. It started off as a bit of a pilot about 6-7 years ago with 12 places across the country, and it's now had a lot of expansion, and I think at last count there are now 92 areas across the country that work in this way. It is a national movement. It is underpinned by common principles and ways of working, and that allows us to adapt those ways of working locally in place based on the unique makeup of our communities. So although it's a national movement, it is grounded and shaped by our communities with that over sort of run through of golden thread of making sure that it's easier for everyone to move more where they live. So today's Lunch and Learn is, as I mentioned, is hopefully the start of a series of sort of spaces to showcase some of the place-based and whole systems work going on in Greater Manchester. So keep an eye out on your calendars for things that other sort of areas of work that we'd like to explore. It's a space to share, for people to share their work, but also to sort of gain insights and feedback from other areas who may be doing similar work. Today, we will be looking at some work that has been going on in Wigan and Bury, based in VCSSE community, and we'll be learning about how to community engagement and in terms of enabling active lives for all. So I'm not going to hold you here any longer. I'm going to hand over to our colleagues Kat, Laura and Melissa, who are going to deep dive into what they have been doing and sort of share their insights and reflections with you all.
Thanks, Steph. So hi everybody, my name's Laura, I'm a project manager at 10GM. I'm here today with Kat and Melissa, if you want to give us a quick wave. Kat and Melissa will be introducing themselves in a moment. Just to say it's absolutely lovely to see so many people joining us today, and I know we're really excited to be able to share some of the learning from the Test and Learn pilots in Bury and Wigan. We're going to get started into the conversation really soon, but just to give you a tiny bit of background to this work before we start. So in 2023, 10GM and GM Moving invested in 2 VCSE infrastructure organisations in Greater Manchester with the aim of testing out approaches that supported Sport England and GM Moving's ambition of connecting communities to enable active lives for all. So we invested into 2 test and learn sites in Bury and Wigan, and the sites were deliberately chosen because they represented different challenges and they were going to take different approaches to community-based work. And we've really wanted to be able to share the learnings that emerged from those community-based approaches taking place in those 2 different localities, and particularly looking at what enables this work, what supports staff members to work in complexity, and how integrating place-based and whole system approaches can drive that change around increasing physical activity and enabling active lives in communities. In terms of what we're going to be doing today, we've created a report that shares the learning in detail, but we really wanted to be able to share some of the insights in a more conversational way with 2 of the key people who were involved in the work. So both Kat and Melissa have been really deeply involved in this piece of work. Unfortunately, Marie, who's from Bury VCFA, is on holiday at the moment. So lucky Marie, we're going to be missing her here today, but Kat is going to pick up and share the learnings from Berry, and Melissa was really key in the Wigan work. So hopefully we can encompass sharing that learning from both the localities. So Kat and Melissa, here's your lovely faces up on the screen. I'm going to stop sharing in a minute, but if I can just bring you in just to introduce yourselves, just say a little bit about your role in this work, and then we'll kind of move into looking at the context for this work and what the approaches were in the localities. So, Kat, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Apologies in advance. I've got the light against me, so I feel like I'm looking at a pitch black screen, but there's not a lot I can do about it. And there's me complaining about the sun, right? So absolutely fantastic to be here. Absolutely great to see that this has generated this level of interest, both with colleagues across Greater Manchester and the place partnership work, as well as outside Greater Manchester with other active partnerships. So as Laura said today, I'm going to be wearing both hats. So I am primarily here as Kat from 10GM, which if you are unfamiliar with, is a joint venture that supports voluntary, community, faith and social enterprise infrastructure organisations across Greater Manchester. Been working in close partnership with GM Moving now for a number of years, and I am the community power stroke community led action catalyst for the work. 10GM in partnership with GM Moving and Sport England commissioned the work. More on that in a minute. And at various points, if I start by saying this is Marie speaking, I will be speaking on behalf of Marie Wilson, who is from the Berry local infrastructure organisation called VCFA. Over to you, Melissa.
Hi everyone, yeah, I'm Melissa Taylor, Community Health Building Lead for Groundwork, based in Wigan. We wanted this to be really conversational today, and I'm slightly concerned.
Oh, you're on mute, Melissa.
Sorry, 3 people, but Kat's being 2 of them, so I'm going to be talking to 2 people. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, so we're going to share the learning from Wigan, and we'll go into a bit more detail of what that was and how that aligns with my role when we get going.
Thanks, Melissa. And I know there were really quite different approaches in the 2 areas. So I wondered if you could both just start us off with giving a bit of an overview for the context of the work in the 2 areas and what you were hoping to kind of test out. So Kat, do you want to kind of come in and then?
Yes, I will give a very, very, very brief overview. In order to ensure that this is brief, those of you who can't see Laura will notice that she has a galloping pen, which she will move across the screen as a not so subtle hint that it's time to move on. So do bear with us on that one. So really, as a way of context setting, this all started in the summer of 2022, by which point GM Moving and 10GM had already been working in partnership together on what were the local pilots for over 5 years. And we had this investment that we fundamentally realized were in the lucky position of having a number of stars aligning and giving ourselves the permission and the power to do things slightly differently from some of the limitations, if you like, of the local pilots. So, for example, the choice of cohort was completely open to the places who wanted to put in an expression of interest. And the thing that struck me as particularly ambitious at the time is, if you are familiar with the Greater Manchester work, we call it the 10+1 conversation, in that there are 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester. So there is a template whereby, in a lot of instances, investment is funneled into Greater Manchester and then goes out again across the 10. And we were super conscious of the fact that if you start dividing everything by 10, the resources get more and more and more scarce. So we made the, at the time, I felt quite ambitious decision to concentrate on 2 areas. And we followed the guidance of the narrative that Sport England was developing at the time around deepening and around expanding. So what we ended up deciding we would do is to both scale up and start up. So we deliberately chose to choose an area with good practice already in place that could be accelerated and could be spared and spread, and a starting up area where we felt that the need was greater. And so there was actually potential, but that potential was untapped. There is a report that will follow this presentation and that I think colleagues are about to put in the chat, which will give you a bit of a guidance and an overview of how the governance and the voting and the mechanism that led us to the decision of Bury and Wigan took place. Just super briefly, that also felt quite different in the sense that we tried to strip the element of competition from it. So we essentially pulled together a design group that was made of BCSE colleagues, Sport England colleagues, GM Moving colleagues, and together kind of designed what this test and learn might look like. There was a voting mechanism at the end, so very much conscious of the fact that however non-competitive, at some point that democratic process will lead to decision making. But we did try to keep it as open and as broad as possible. So there will be more on that in the report. This is me with Cat hat on. This is now me with Marie hat on. So if I give you some very brief context of how Bury decided to approach it. So the test and learn essentially in Bury was focused on developing physical activity opportunities at really hyper-local area. So if you're familiar with Greater Manchester, we scaled it down even from a locality perspective. So the money didn't necessarily go into a borough as such. So within Bury, it went into the neighbourhood of Whitefield. And then within that neighbourhood of Whitefield, it became even more hyper-local. And it went to a place called Bessie's of the Barn, which is always a great name if you're not familiar with it. And the reason for that was that there was an understanding that it was an area that had some green and some blue assets, but really limited community-based venues that went beyond the commercial sector. So they used data from social prescribing sets and teams who had reported that there was a lack of provision, as well as the mapping of the bids that went in for the holiday activity funds. And that also confirmed that there was a minimal provision in Bury. So they layered that with levels of inactivity of children and young people, and that became the focus of the people and the place. Which again, happy to talk to a little bit about later, but I thought was super brave because it isn't easy to adopt an asset-based, place-based approach that's strength-based when the place is asset poor. And I'll stop there.
Okay, over to me. So Wigan, we took a completely different approach and there's reasons for that. So our approach was borough-wide. Within Wigan, we already had an established community health building network, which I lead on, and this is already funded through the Sport England Place partner investment. So we were already developing active lives for all, a whole system approach, utilising social prescribing pathways. But what we'd found through that work was there was a real gap. We'd sort of identified a gap in terms of community sports clubs. So what we realised was they were largely absent from any of the existing community health building network, social prescribing landscape. They just weren't present. However, we also knew that they were really trusted local assets. Many sports clubs have got their own buildings, they've got volunteers, and they're deep rooted in communities. So we wanted to test sort of the role of that community sports clubs to see what they could play in the part of a social prescribing pathway. So could these clubs become welcoming non-clinical spaces where people could connect, build the confidence and start to move more? We wanted to see if we could widen the community health building offer, so that rather than it just being within sort of community centres, we could utilise sports club settings as well. So clubs could start to host community-led activities, social groups, wellbeing sessions, informal meetups alongside the sport that they were already delivering, just to widen that offer. We wanted to understand what sports club needed to broaden that community role, whether that was around governance, funding, safeguarding, sustainability, and also what conditions were needed to enable those sports clubs to take on that community asset role. So what system shifts did we need to make that possible? So to do that, the pilot invested in a full-time sports club integration coordinator. We had Wigan Hannah, because we also had a Berry Hannah as well, which is very confusing. We had Wigan Hannah for 15 months. And her role was sort of dedicated around relationships, building that network, building the trusted relationships and building those connections with the wider community health building offer. And I'm going to leave that there because I know you said we have to be brief.
Thanks.
But hopefully that makes sense as to what we tried to do.
Thanks, Melissa and Kat. And there's a lot more detail as well in the report around the kind of the what, you know, so what actually happened. But we were really keen to devote a lot of time today to drawing out really what the learnings have been for you both through this work. So could you just, you know, like share, and I think it'd be really good if it can just be like a conversation between you as well, around what enables and supports community-based approaches to active lives for all. So what have you been learning about what enables and supports this approach?
Shall I start, Kat?
So you go for it. You go for it.
Well, we had a quick chat just before, didn't we? I said actually, although they were two very different approaches, the learning was quite similar. So we used to regularly connect and share the learnings. I think certainly for Wigan, and I would say this probably replicated in Bury too, but Kat can input, was around place-based community-led physical activity work. Depends on relationships, depends on trust, depends on time. It takes time and a flexible approach. So enabling that community-based approach was around that dedicated role to the person. That integration coordinator role was really important. That role to reach the community, to reach the clubs in their own spaces. So where previously we might have hoped that they would attend meetings, it was actually really going to them and having those conversations, building trust over time, creating a feedback loop as well, so that they felt part of that wider discussions and the whole system, connecting them into that system and supporting some of the capacity building. Anything to add on that, Kat, from Berry's point of view?
Yes, just to add, there are again, like Melissa was saying, Berry also invested in a Hannah. So Hannah was a part-time community development officer, and the rest of the funding was then in Berry was channeled to providing support training, volunteer expenses, and a community investment fund for activities. And there's two things that spring to mind. So what we made a point of deliberately protecting time for during the work was a sense of collective reflective practice. So we would meet regularly, jot down our thoughts on Padlet, go back to them, redefine them. And I think to me, the thing that really stood out is I genuinely thought to start with that we were starting from two extremes. So there is almost a place with nothing in and a place with too much in that you need to make sense of. And actually what happened is we ended up meeting in the middle, because that level of working in complexity and systems change presented the same barriers and the same challenges. And there are two things that stood out in the project, and I'm going to quote Marie and I'm going to quote Melissa, because to me they absolutely sum up the essence of the work. Marie used to say, it's all about the human. This is all about the human. And then Melissa came out with this beautiful phrase of, if you think of relationships at the speed of trust, which is the way that people tend to operate in, or at least they are familiar and conscious of, put a timeline on that speed of trust. When you've done that, double it. And when you've done that, double it again. Because however much time you set aside to develop that, it is never enough. So to me, in essence, that 1 year of test and learn work was essentially relationship building. And everything that sprang from that in terms of system change and the ripple effects that we are seeing now, both at city region level and nationally, are the result of the trust and the human. And that feels like really, really, really important to say. Anybody who is in this space who has worked with partners across the education system or across highways will be familiar of how difficult it could be to engage or even kind of get a foot in the door to start the conversation. And that's very much what happened in Bury, in the sense that even finding the right staff member within the school proved a challenge and was pivotal in the work going in one direction or the other, and moving away from that transactional request that came from the school of, oh, you got a pot of money, can you find me a dance teacher, and trying to kind of elevate the conversation beyond that. Took time. And I think in Bury, again, because it was children and young people led, they were quite deliberate in getting the input of both community connectors and the youth voice into the work, and so connected with various community centres and with central schools, with youth cabinets, just to get an actual sense of what mattered to people and their sense of identity in a very particular place. And I'll stop there because I can feel a galloping pen about to come up.
I wonder for both of you about, because, you know, I guess hearing from both of you there about the importance of relationships, and something as well about some challenges sometimes about the pace of the work or the length of time it can take to build relationships. And I wonder, what was your sense of what were the things that supported those staff members to actually to work in complexity, really, and to actually to keep going in, you know, what could sometimes feel like quite a slow moving piece of work, I think in different ways in both areas, but
I think Kat's probably already mentioned some of it. I would have said the reflective practice, so that space to come together, and I was involved in that, Marie was involved in that, as well as the two Hannahs, but it was bringing us all together to share the learning, to so when that progress feels a bit slow, actually you realise that that was the same for Wigan and Bury, and actually that's all part of the process that we were doing. Trust building is slow, system change is not linear, it's small steps. So I think for morale, if nothing else, I think it grounded the two Hannahs, and it was okay that this felt messy and that they weren't progressing at the speed that they perhaps thought they might have done. But it was the reflective practice of bringing it back to, okay, so what have we been doing? What are we learning? What are we going to do next? That kind of kept us on track and gave us some tangible things, I think. Certainly for me, that was the key thing. And also having the experience from the place partner as it was. So myself and Maria used to already working in that complex way. So I think that helped the two Hannahs to sort of guide them along the way with this.
Yeah, I'd add there's something around that support for the workforce which was absolutely crucial. I lost count of the amount of times that we would join up and meet, and one of the Hannahs inevitably would say, is this the work? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it fast enough? What does it look like? And so there was something about us collectively supporting them in kind of holding their nerves against a system that wants delivery now and things to happen now. And again, I'm going to coin a phrase from what Marie used to say, and her phrase was, "It takes a village." So you cannot just plonk a community developer into a place and expect great things to happen and relationships to flourish. There is an absolute network of support from workforce, paid and unpaid, from colleagues, from partners from other places, an absolute ton of learning from the systems leadership work that myself and Melissa and Marie had been involved with, and that essentially gave us the tools to be a bit brave about things and actually to push back against that system need for continuous tangible delivery, and really enabled us to sort of in a sense embed that notion that actually the relationship is the work here. This thing has got legs. This thing is not going to finish in 12 months. The results of this you may see 5 years from now, and that's okay.
And I think back to humans and people, the biggest success certainly for us in Wigan was the people within the clubs that were already part of that system, understood that way of working, saw the community, wanted to develop things for the community rather than being channeled within just the sport specific element of their work. So again, the success came when it was the people that wanted to drive that work. That was we saw the quickest movement there.
I wonder what for both of you, what do you feel most proud of about this work, sort of looking back at what happened? What do you feel most proud of?
I asked Hannah, I kind of felt she should have been here today really, but her take was actually doing the work, although she knew she was short term, she knew the work wasn't, so she approached it in that way. So she didn't just get some quick wins, she really did that foundation work for us to build on. And I think what we've seen now in Wigan, we have what's called a SHAPE board, Sport, Health and Physical Education Board. We're restructuring that. It's going to have a new name, not totally sure, maybe Wigan Moving, but that in the past has again had that gap for community sports clubs, but I think now through this restructure it's really brought the community sports club to the forefront, actually, of not just delivering sport, but actually that wider opportunity for people to move more within their local communities. So I think that's a huge shift really that we're starting to see now within Wigan when we're looking strategically at what does moving more look like, and that really involves the sports clubs.
I'd say for Barry, there's probably a couple of things. I think the first one I referred to slightly earlier about the bravery that it took to go to a place that in a sense goes completely against the norms of what the common co-production, strength-based, asset-based, person-centered approach narrative looks like, and that sense of we need to invest in capacity and capability of the system to be able to generate that. And in Bury, it was particularly significant because it was the first time that investment landed directly from a commissioner to a VCSE sector infrastructure. So the path would normally be that it lands with either public health or local authority, which then gives it back out into community. This went 100% straight from commissioner to community. And I cannot tell you the ripple effects that is having even now in other places and other spaces. So there's a deeper level of understanding of trust the community, in the sense the community can absolutely do this. Community is absolutely capable of holding down £100,000 investment and do great things with it. And this has then created further ripple effects in the relationship between the VCSE sector and, for example, colleagues within the public services reform space. So again, the relationships feel fundamentally different. And I think it's no small part because of this.
And I think just to add to that, Kat, what was really helpful was commissioners in the room learning together. So that reflective practice is so important. So it's not what's going on the ground and being translated by someone and maybe landing in a slightly different way, but actually we were all learning together on this. And the light bulb moments were coming together, and that for me is really important. Going, looking to the future and how we commission things.
I wonder, Melissa, just quickly before we open up to questions, what did that look like in practice, that learning together with the commissioner? Was it how often did you meet, or how did you share? I know, Kat, you mentioned about using a Padlet, but I wonder, just to give people a picture of, or a bit more of more detail of how that happened.
So there was a coming together of place and then a coming together of places, for want of a better definition. So I would touch base with both Wigan and very regularly separately. And then we used to come up, we used to meet together on a monthly basis. And again, really, really super proud of the fact that, we are talking about people with very, very busy schedules, but we made a point of really, really protecting the time to touch base, but in a really meaningful way. So there is something about not rocking up at a meeting, but really grounding yourself when you do that and taking the time to be present in that space and giving yourself the gift of that headspace to really think deeply about the work. And obviously other media are available. We found Padlet a really, really good way of jotting things down as they came, so you didn't have to be what's the word, kind of super conscious about having full sentences, or it was a really good brain dumping tool that got built on and got layered on and enabled us to go back to it and reflect on it and expand it wider and kind of sense check whether, we noticed that last month, is this still the case now? But the biggest one for me is the gift of presence and how hard that can be.
Yeah, and I agree. In addition to that, in Wigan, we have a weekly reflection session. So when Hannah was here, the 4 colleagues working on Place Partner, she was part of that. I think, again, that helped her keep on track. And her background was in education. And I know a worry when she came into the role was actually not having a structured timetable and the bell ringing at certain times. So she was launched into a completely different way of working, which felt quite alien, but she was a people person. She could build those relationships. So that dedicated time to just be able to reassure her that, it was feeling uncomfortable. Yes, it was feeling a little bit messy, but that is the way we work, and that is okay to feel like that, I think. But we had to dedicate that time. Otherwise, just, those meetings would never happen, and other priorities would get in the way. So we prioritize that time very much.
Can I just add really, really, really quickly that I just wanted to perhaps state the obvious, but it might be worth stating that none of this happened in splendid isolation. So this was not work that happened in silo. So it isn't a coincidence that Bury and Wigan were already local pilot areas. It isn't a coincidence that GeoMoving itself is fundamentally based on that sense of continuous iterative learning. And so we had the opportunity to bring learning and challenges and questions to other spaces as well, whether there was a GeoMoving monthly forum. Just wanted to kind of just make it clear that this did not happen over there somewhere.